NFL players are supposed to be disciplined, controlled, and elite. They are the 0.1% who made it through the meat grinder of professional sports. But off the field, some lived completely different lives. We're talking about murder investigations, cult killings, missing evidence, and careers that didn't just fall apart, they collapsed overnight. Some of these stories sound like a script for a psychological thriller, but every single one of them actually happened. Stay with me, because the further we go, the thinner the line between a superstar and a predator becomes. Jim Dunaway. Jim Dunaway was a massive presence on the 1972 Miami Dolphins. He was a 280-pound tackle, a key cog in the only perfect season in NFL history. He was a champion, but his post-game life turned into a total disaster that no highlight reel could ever fix. Fast forward to 1998. The setting is a quiet property in Mississippi. His ex-wife, Pama Dunaway, is found at the bottom of a half-empty swimming pool. She isn't just drowned. Her body shows signs of a brutal struggle. At the time, the two were locked in a vicious legal battle over a massive estate and his NFL pension. The motive was sitting right there on the table. Local authorities couldn't ignore it. The case goes to a grand jury, but here is where the system stalls. The jury decides there isn't enough hard evidence to lock him away for good. He walks, but his own children don't let it go. They take him to civil court. They present a case so compelling that a jury finds him responsible for her death. They hit him with a $579,000 judgment. Dunaway spends the rest of his life as a ghost. He's a man the law couldn't touch, but the public and his own blood never forgave. He maintained his innocence until his final breath in 2018. But that pool remains a permanent stain on the perfect season. He was just the first in a long line of stars who traded the stadium lights for a prison cell. Tommy Kane. Tommy Kane was a Canadian icon. He was a wide receiver who broke out with the Seattle Seahawks before returning home to become a hero in Montreal. But by 2003, the hero narrative was dead. A toxic mix of severe depression and drug use turned Kane into a local nightmare. The scene is in his mother's house. Kane is spiraling. He confronts his estranged wife, Tammy Kane. This isn't just a heated argument. Kane loses total control. He launches a physical onslaught that defies any logical explanation. He attacks her so relentlessly that the life is literally beaten out of her. The most haunting part? She dies in the arms of a church counselor who was trying to intervene. The tragedy shook Canada. People couldn't reconcile the man who caught touchdowns in front of thousands with the man now sitting in a high-security cell. During the trial, his defense claimed he was in a total blackout. They blamed his spiraling mental health and the substances in his system. His own mother stood in the courtroom and spoke out against him. He was handed an 18-year sentence. He eventually walked free on parole, but the man who once dominated the field was gone. Kane's story was a tragedy of the mind, but the next story involves a white limousine, a missing suit, and a mystery that defined an entire era of the NFL. Ray Lewis. Ray Lewis is a first-ballot legend. He's a linebacker who played with a fire that seemed to come from another planet. But in the year 2000, that fire burned two men to a tragic end in the streets of Atlanta. It's the night of a post-Super Bowl party. Tensions are high. Suddenly, everything breaks loose. A massive fight erupts outside a club. Two men, Jacinth Baker and Richard Lawler, hit the ground. They're bleeding out from life-ending wounds. Now it's a double murder investigation. Investigators move in. They find crimson evidence inside Ray Lewis's own limousine. The trail points directly at his inner circle. But then comes the weirdest part of the entire case: the suit. Lewis was wearing a distinctive white suit that night. After the incident, it vanished into thin air. It was never seen again. Facing life behind bars, Lewis makes a high-stakes move. He cuts a deal to testify against his friends in exchange for a slap-on-the-wrist misdemeanor. His buddies are eventually cleared. Lewis goes back to the field and wins a Super Bowl MVP just weeks later. It's a case that still divides the world. Many wonder if the superstar used his fame to escape the ultimate consequence. He built a Hall of Fame career, but the ghosts of Atlanta never really left his side. The Lewis case was about what happened in the streets, but for Sierra Wood, the horror happened behind closed doors. Sierra Wood. Sierra Wood was a star at Notre Dame. He had the world at his feet. He spent time with the Texans and the Patriots looking for his big break. But his real legacy is a dark apartment in Las Vegas that still haunts the city. In 2019, the police are called. A 5-year-old girl is found with injuries no child should ever endure. The details are stomach-turning. Investigators discover that Wood had forced a little girl to go through grueling, painful exercise routines as a form of punishment. This wasn't just tough love. This was a systematic nightmare. The physical stress was so intense that the child's heart simply stopped. Wood took a plea deal to avoid the most severe charges, landing himself a life sentence. He went from the bright lights of Saturday Night Football to a concrete room where he'll spend the rest of his life. The details of what that girl went through are enough to make anyone lose sleep. But even this feels isolated compared to the man who joined a violent religious cult. Robert Rozier. Robert Rozier only played a handful of games for the Cardinals. His NFL career was a blip, but his post-NFL life was straight out of a horror movie. After failing out of the league, Rozier joined a Miami cult led by a man claiming to be a god, Yahweh ben Yahweh. Rozier wasn't just a member. He became the top enforcer. To prove his loyalty, the god ordered him to take the lives of those the cult called devils. Rozier was told to bring back trophies of his devotion. He didn't just do it once. He admitted to ending at least 7 lives in a series of ritualistic attacks. He was finally caught after a failed attempt and immediately flipped on the cult leader to save his own skin. He spent 10 years in prison before disappearing into the witness protection program. He became a shadow in the system. But the next name on the list had a rage that even prison walls couldn't contain: Lawrence Phillips. Lawrence Phillips was a superstar at Nebraska. He was so talented that the St. Louis Rams were willing to ignore every single red flag. But Phillips carried a darkness with him that followed him from the locker room to the street. His career was a mess of assaults and run-ins with the law. Eventually, the law won. He was handed a 31-year sentence in a California prison. But even behind bars, the violence followed him. In 2015, his cellmate was found dead after a late-night altercation. Phillips was the prime suspect. Facing the prospect and never seeing the sun again, Phillips took matters into his own hands and ended his life in his cell. When doctors looked at his brain afterward, they found signs of the worst brain damage they'd ever seen in someone his age. It made people wonder, did the sport turn a gifted athlete into a ticking time bomb? His story is the ultimate tragedy of a man who was his own worst enemy from start to finish. While Phillips' rage was explosive, the next case was a silent massacre that came out of nowhere. Phillip Adams. Phillip Adams was a journeyman cornerback. He played for 6 different teams without ever causing a stir in the headlines. That changed on a quiet afternoon in 2021. Adams walked into a doctor's home in South Carolina and committed a senseless act of violence. He took the lives of the doctor, his wife, their 2 grandkids, and 2 workers. Then he ended his own life in the woods nearby. There was no motive, no argument, no warning, just a total, terrifying break from reality. When experts looked at his brain, they found massive damage to the areas that control impulses and behavior. It was stage 2 CTE. His time on the field had left him a broken shell. The tragedy left a small town in pieces and reignited the debate over how the game changes the men who play it. It was a mass tragedy that felt like it was written in the stars, long before he ever picked up a weapon. Ray Carruth. Ray Carruth was a first-round pick for the Carolina Panthers. He had everything, a $3.7 million contract and a bright future. But when his girlfriend, Cherika Adams, got pregnant, he saw her as a financial burden. He didn't just walk away. He orchestrated an execution. He hired a hitman and used his own car to block her in so she couldn't escape the ambush. Cherika was shot 4 times, but she stayed strong enough to call 911. She whispered his name into the receiver before she passed. Her son survived the attack, but was left with permanent disabilities. Carruth tried to run. The police eventually found him hiding in the trunk of a car at a cheap motel in Tennessee. He served nearly 20 years for the conspiracy. He walked out of prison in 2018 to a world that will never forget his name. He claimed he wanted a fresh start, but the memory of that 911 call is impossible to erase. It's a story that proves money can't buy a conscience. O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson was the biggest star in the world. He moved from the field to Hollywood with total ease. He was the juice. But in 1994, he became the lead character in the most famous trial in human history. His ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ron Goldman were found with life-ending wounds on a sidewalk in Brentwood. All eyes turned to O.J. We all remember the white Bronco chase. We remember the glove that didn't fit. The acquittal split the country in half. But even though he walked free from the criminal trial, a civil jury later found him responsible and ordered him to pay $33.5 million to the families. He spent the rest of his life in a legal tug-of-war. He eventually went to prison for a separate incident in Las Vegas involving sports memorabilia. He took his secrets to the grave in 2024. His legacy is now more about the courtroom than the football field. It remains the ultimate example of how a hero can fall from the highest peak into the deepest darkness. Aaron Hernandez. Aaron Hernandez was a superstar for the New England Patriots. He was catching passes from Tom Brady while hiding a terrifying secret. He signed a $40 million deal, but he was still hanging out with a dangerous crowd. In 2013, he orchestrated the end of Odin Lloyd's life. Lloyd was practically part of his own family. The evidence was everywhere: home security cameras, shell casings in a rental car, and cell phone pings. He was quickly sent away for life. The drama didn't end there. He was later accused of a separate double murder in Boston. Eventually, he ended his own life in a prison cell. When researchers looked at his brain, they found a level of damage that defied logic for a 27-year-old. It was the most severe case of CTE that they'd ever seen in someone that age. He was a man fighting a war inside his own head while trying to play the part of a superstar. He was the ultimate cautionary tale. If you want more deep dives into the cases the league wants you to forget, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a breakdown. What's the most shocking case on this list? Let me know in the comments. We'll see you in the next one.